Thank you for continuing traveling with me. We are going to spend a few minutes today talking about the Renaissance Papacy. And this is lesson 12. Lesson 12, we are talking about the Renaissance, which is the beginning of the modern world. And what we are doing is focusing on the popes during the Renaissance. What we are doing is analyzing what was going on among the leaders of the papal states, because the popes were the political leaders of the papal states. The popes were the political rulers of all this land that is called the papal states. It's also, some people call it papal states. And if you notice, in Italy there were many independent states. So we have here Milan, we have, back up there is Venice, then we have the Republic of Lucca, but other than the papal states, the Republic of Florence had become one of the most powerful ones, both culturally and economically. But as I said, today we will just focus on the Renaissance Papacy, because the popes, remember, the popes were perhaps the most influential political and social figure of the Middle Ages. The main question, I guess, is, and this will take us back to the beginning of the semester, what was the function of the Pope? And if you remember, the papacy started in about the 3rd century, and the function of the Pope was to lead the Christian world. In other words, to minister to all Christians. And that had been, so it was a spiritual role, and they were supposed to fulfill that spiritual role. However, what was really the reality of the papacy during the Renaissance? Well, the popes in the Renaissance, the ones that we are going to be talking about, were not the best. They were not very good people. And it all started really after the Great Schism that you remember happened in the 14th century, in the early 14th century. And the summary, in a nutshell, what we should say is that during the Renaissance, the papacy was totally, fully involved in what is called the Renaissance spirit. And I will remind you what the Renaissance spirit is. And these are the 3 popes that are the most famous or infamous during the Renaissance. And it is because of these popes that the prestige of the church continued to decline during the Renaissance. It had declined during the Great Schism. You may remember that. But now the popes were certainly not an example of what the pope should be, but the popes were a perfect example of the features of the Renaissance. So we could say that the papacy in Italy was totally involved in the Renaissance spirit, and they were actually the leaders of the Renaissance. First of all, remember that the 3 features of the Renaissance were secularism, humanism, and individualism. Now, from the definition of these 3 features in the Renaissance, now we give them a different connotation. But at that time, secularism meant the interest in the here and now. And those three popes were fully involved in the here and now of Italian politics. And what they wanted was to make their land powerful and strong, and maybe the strongest. One of these popes is quoted as saying, "Let us enjoy the papacy, since God has given it to us." And that's what he did, enjoyed fully the papacy. These popes, all three, promoted, especially Alexander, promoted family and personal interests. Their main goal was to defeat the enemies of the papal states, and as one article defined it was, they had lack of interest in spiritual pursuit. The other feature of the Renaissance is humanism. Humanism has many features, but the most important features are interest in education, in culture, but the main focus of attention was the Greco-Roman traditions, Greco-Roman art, Greco-Roman languages, the learning of the Greek language, and these popes were patrons of art, culture, architecture. They collected books, they collected art pieces. The Vatican Museum today is a perfect example of the interest of these popes in the all kind of art collection. Finally, the last feature of the Renaissance and remember, all these features are features of today's society, especially our society. The other feature is individualism. And individualism focuses on personal achievements, personal glory, to be recognized as the very best. You want people to know how good you are. You want people to know why you are the very best for the job, why you should get the awards that they are offering. And so basically, individualism means that you want to have recognition of what you have achieved. So let's briefly look at the three popes that are the most important popes of the Renaissance. The first one is Alexander the Sixth, and everything that he did was the opposite of what he should have done. First of all, he had a mistress living with him in the Vatican. Actually, he had two mistresses, I believe, because each of these two children, these are his children, each one is from a different mother. I'm not totally sure, but I think. This one, Cesare Borgia, is recognized as one of the cruelest people that have ever existed. He used cruelty, he killed anybody whom he didn't like, he used intrigue, everything to achieve what he wanted. He received a lot of income from the offices that the Pope had given him, and he achieved a great deal of power. So much so that this person that you see here, Machiavelli, when he wrote The Prince, he used Cesare Borgia as an example. The other daughter of Alexander VI was Lucrezia Borgia, who was also one of the most infamous women in the Renaissance. This Pope, Alessandro, was also into intrigue. He wanted to make deals with the different republics of the different states in Italy, and he loved to do that. In fact, he's quoted as saying, "Oh, what would Rome be without a plot?" And there are a lot of paintings by famous artists in which he is just planning different conspiracies and plots. So this is Alessandro the Sixth. Now, another one that you may have heard a lot about is Pope Julius. I don't have too many negative things about Julius. The only thing that people criticize of him is that he spent a great deal of time leading armies, the Roman armies, against the enemies of the Papal States. And of course, this is not a very good example that a pope should give. In fact, this is one of the quotes. How, O bishop, standing in the room of the apostles, dare you teach the people the things that pertain to war? Supposedly, remember, a Christian is not going to look for war. Well, these popes gave the opposite example. But other than that, Pope Julius II was a fantastic humanist. He is one of the best examples of humanism in the Renaissance. He supported Michelangelo and Raphael, the two great artists. Raphael painted the School of Athens under him, commissioned by him in the Vatican, and he commissioned Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. He ordered the design of by Michelangelo, by the way, of the Cathedral of Saint Peter, and he commissioned Michelangelo to make his own personal tomb, his mausoleum. And this gives you an example of individualism. He wanted to have the best tomb in the world. The tomb was never totally finished, but this statue is one of the most famous statues of Michelangelo, is the Moses. And it is supposed to go in the center of the big tomb of Pope Julius II. In this classic movie, The Agony of the Ecstasy, that is an old movie but worth seeing, you see a lot of Pope Julius II. The last pope that I want to mention is a pope that just with his name, you can imagine what kind of pope he was. He was a member of the Medici family. I believe he was the son of Lorenzo de' Medici, although I'm not absolutely sure. But he followed all the Medici interests. So remember, the Medici are bankers, they are businessmen, and they are very interested in money and very interested in success. And he became the Pope just because of that. However, even though he said, and he's the one who said, let us enjoy the papacy since God has given it to us. He's Pope Leo the 10th is the one who said that. But he was also very interested in culture, so he was a humanist. He is the one, together with Julius II, who made Rome the center of the Renaissance. So from Florence, as a cultural center of the Renaissance, it moved to Rome because of these two popes. And the problem with Pope Leo is that he was not interested in religion. He was not interested in the church. So when Martin Luther posted his thesis, he did not pay any attention to him. If a different pope had been pope at the time, maybe the Protestant Reformation would not have happened. But when he heard about Martin Luther, what he said is, a drunken monk has written the 95 Theses. When he sobers up, he will change his mind. That's what he said, talking about Martin Luther. Well, certainly that did not go really well, especially because he was so desperate to finish the cathedral, the Basilica of St. Peter's, that he allowed Tetzel to charge for the indulgences and part of the funds were going to be used to finish the basilica. And this is one of the things that Martin Luther criticized of him. Well, so that's the problem with the Medici Pope. However, again, he was a humanist, and this is what he said: "We have conceived it to be our duty to foster literature and the fine arts. Nothing is better or more useful to mankind than such studies." So again, immersed in the Renaissance, but neglecting his real duties. So this is a summary of the main popes of the Renaissance, and it shows you the facts behind the thesis that the Renaissance Papacy was not what should have been, and that the Renaissance Papacy was the leading group, an important part of the Renaissance movement. So what is what we can see as the result of this spirit of the Renaissance Papacy? Well, unfortunately, because of what was going on in the papacy during the 15th and 16th century, and because of the Great Western Schism, the prestige of the church had gone down so much that the Protestant Reformation was a natural movement against the church. And so we see that Martin Luther posted his thesis. Right after Martin Luther, Zwingli continued. Then after Zwingli came Calvin. Then came the movement of the Presbyterians following Calvin, the Anabaptists, and finally Henry VIII. And Henry VIII completed the Reformation in England. And the Reformation in England is the topic of the next lesson, which will be the last lesson of our semester. So with this, we end this not so short, lecture on the papacy during the Renaissance.